Imagine driving home alone on a desolate country road when you spot a woman in a tattered white dress standing frozen in the darkness. You tell yourself she's just lost until she turns to follow your car. What happens next isn't an accident, it's a hunt, and when your tires are shredded, your phone dies, and her haunting whisper, "I see you," echoes from the woods. You realize she's been waiting for you all along. The night was still, the kind of stillness that feels like the world is holding its breath. The air was cold, sharp, and carried with it the faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The moon hung low in the sky, a pale, sickly crescent that cast long, jagged shadows across the narrow country road. The trees on either side of the road stood like sentinels, their bare branches clawing at the heavens. It was the kind of night where the darkness felt alive, where every sound seemed magnified and every shadow seemed to move. I was driving home from a late shift at the hospital, the kind of shift that leaves you drained and hollow, your mind buzzing with the remnants of chaos and urgency. The road was familiar, one I had driven countless times before, but tonight it felt different. The headlights of my car cut through the darkness, illuminating the asphalt ahead, but the light seemed feeble, as if the night itself was resisting it. The road twisted and turned, winding through the dense forest like a serpent, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. It was then that I saw her. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the trees. But as I drew closer, the shape became clearer. A woman stood at the edge of the road, her back to the trees, her figure illuminated by the glow of my headlights. She was dressed in a white gown, the fabric tattered and stained, hanging limply from her thin frame. Her hair was long and unkempt, falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. She was barefoot, her feet pale against the dark earth. I slowed the car, my heart pounding in my chest. She didn't move, didn't turn to look at me. She just stood there, her head bowed, her arms hanging limply at her sides. I rolled down the window, the cold air rushing in, and called out to her. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't respond, didn't even flinch. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the gear shift. Something about her presence made my skin crawl, a primal instinct screaming at me to drive away, to leave her behind. But I couldn't, not when she might be in trouble. I pulled the car over to the side of the road, the tires crunching on the gravel. I stepped out, the cold air biting at my skin, and approached her cautiously. The closer I got, the more I could see the details of her appearance. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her face was gaunt, her cheekbones sharp beneath the thin layer of flesh. Her lips were cracked and dry, and her eyes were empty, devoid of any light or life. "Miss," I said, my voice trembling, "are you hurt? Do you need a ride?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, her head tilted slightly, as if she were listening to something I couldn't hear. I reached out, my hand hovering just above her shoulder, and that's when she moved. Her head snapped up, her eyes locking onto mine, and I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. Her eyes were black, like two voids, and they seemed to pull at me, drawing me in. Her lips curled into a grotesque smile, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too many. "I see you," she whispered, her voice a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down my spine. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back, didn't dare to. I could hear her behind me, the sound of her bare feet slapping against the asphalt, the rustle of her gown as she moved. I threw myself into the car, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring to life. I peeled out, the tires screeching, and didn't stop until I was miles away, the woman and the road far behind me. But she wasn't gone. The next few days were a blur. I tried to convince myself that it had been a hallucination, a figment of my exhausted mind, but deep down I knew better. I could still feel her eyes on me, could still hear her voice whispering in my ear. I started seeing her everywhere, in the corner of my eye, in the reflection of a window, in the shadows of my bedroom at night. She was always there, always watching, always smiling that grotesque smile. I tried to ignore her, to push her out of my mind, but she wouldn't let me. She was relentless, her presence growing stronger with each passing day. I stopped sleeping, afraid of what I might see in my dreams. I stopped eating, the thought of food making me nauseous. I was a shell of myself, a shadow of the person I had once been. And then, one night, she came for me. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping on the window. My heart stopped, my blood turning to ice in my veins. I didn't want to look, didn't want to see, but I couldn't help myself. I turned my head slowly, my eyes wide with terror. And there she was. She was standing outside my window, her face pressed against the glass, her black eyes staring into mine. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but I knew what she was saying. "I see you," I screamed, scrambling out of bed and running to the door. I threw it open, the cold night air rushing in, and ran into the darkness. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just had to get away from her, away from the thing that was haunting me. But she was always there, always just a step behind me. I could hear her laughter, a dry, rasping sound that echoed in my ears. I could feel her breath on the back of my neck, cold and damp. I ran until my legs gave out, until I collapsed on the ground, my chest heaving, my vision blurring. And then she was there, standing over me, her black eyes gleaming in the moonlight. She reached out, her fingers brushing against my cheek, and I felt a cold, numbing sensation spread through my body. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was trapped, helpless. "I see you," she whispered, her voice a soft, soothing sound that made my skin crawl. "And now, you see me." And then she was gone, disappearing into the darkness, leaving me alone in the cold, silent night. I don't know how long I lay there, staring up at the sky, my mind numb with fear. Eventually, I managed to drag myself to my feet and stumble back to my house. I locked the doors, closed the curtains, and sat in the corner of the room, my arms wrapped around my knees, my eyes darting around the shadows. She's still out there. I know she is. I can feel her, watching me, waiting for me. And I know that one day she'll come for me again. And this time, I won't be able to run.